Going live with Tori and Emily, so I'll go ahead and add them. Hello, everybody. Hey, hey.
Hello. Welcome.
Okay, adding Tori.
It's gonna.
What is your cocktail of the night, Emily?
My husband made me my typical martini, and I finished it. So I'm one deep, friends.
I love it.
That's usually where I call it, but like I don't know. The night's so young.
Okay, I sent an invite to Tori. We'll see if she gets it. Live is so fickle. And Tori, I know you joined to listen in. You can also request from me if the invite is not coming through. Yep, it just, let's try this again.
Who here? Who is already here? Who was also at Meg's chat last week? Hi, Tori.
Hi.
Who's joining us for the second time? Anybody? Any repeaters?
Waves if you are joining for the second time.
Yeah, wave if you're joining for the second time. We had so many people come for Meg's chat about the timeline of historical romance. Yay! Okay, we got some folks. Cool.
Yay, welcome, Tori.
Welcome, Tori.
Okay, well, we'll go ahead and get started. This is our second Romancelandia University live lecture. And as Emily said last week, we had Meg Gatsa Book Club join us to talk about the timeline of historical romance. And I knew when we were cooking up this idea and thinking about all the things that we wanted to do and people we wanted to try to pull in to teach us more, we were both like, we got to talk to Tori because nobody is as well read in historical romance as our girl Tori. So we're so excited she was willing to do this. I was so pumped, Tori, when we talked to you about just various topics that have been interesting to us and things that we have wanted to learn more about. And when you threw out the idea and just your thoughts around how female main characters have evolved through the decades of historical romance, that was fascinating to me, and I'm really excited to talk to you more about it and hear a little bit about your perspective as a longtime historical romance reader. We've been pretty transparent that we both started reading historical romance just in the last 2-3 years. So I'd love to hear a little bit about your romance journey to start out and when you started reading historical romance.
Well, I was a wee little babe of 12.
I love that.
I like was always a voracious reader, even when I was, like little. But when I was like 12, my grandmother, my mom's mom, she had the most insane romance collection I've ever seen. And she literally slipped a copy of Whitney My Love by Judith McNaught, pre-rewrite into my backpack. And I was like, just don't, she was an old Southern mama, so she's like, just don't read the bad parts, honey. Don't read the bad parts. Which I read, because obviously. But it just kind of kicked off from there. Any time I was at her house, I was constantly swapping one for another one. And she just kept feeding into it. We'd go to Walmart and she'd buy like 10 Harlequins at a time and she'd be done with them and she'd be like, your turn.
Man.
Yeah.
Jillian is loving that it was Whitney My Love in the comments. It's a real specific intro to the genre. And I love
real specific intro.
She was like your lending library. Like you were able to just, that's amazing.
She very much was. My mom was a romance reader, not like to that extent. But she, I guess kind of got that from Granny Coat too. But she mostly read historicals, but she was a big like Harlequin category, Harlequin Presents. So she was constantly handing me Westerns. Oh my God, she loved Westerns. So she just kind of fed that.
How many do you think you've read today? If you had to do like a round number of historical romances.
I actually was trying to calculate this the other day. I've probably read 200-ish a year since I was 12.
Oh my God.
And I will be 27. I'm 27 now. I'll be 28 in April. So
Tori, we are not worthy.
probably 3,000.
No. Like,
Oh my
that's amazing.
Yeah, probably 3,000-ish, I would say, in my life.
Oh, she
Yeah.
said 3,000
I
ish.
Give or take.
love it.
Yeah.
This is why we were so excited to talk to you about this, because I feel
No.
like there's so many times where digging into the genre, I feel like I'm just starting to understand some of the inside jokes and language. You know, it's
Yep.
like you just feel like you're on the tip of it, and it's so exciting to learn more about just like the kind of rich discussion that has been happening among romance authors for decades. So I would love for you to like start us out with the beginning of that journey, and specifically if this is something that you've thought about recently as you've been reading more modern historical romances. Like, what is it that kind of brought this theme to life for you, and seeing how female main characters have changed?
So when I did my like mega post a couple weeks ago on how consent has changed throughout the years, I was reading Beyond Heathen Bosoms by Sarah Wendell, and in there she was talking about Laura Kinsale, who we all know and love.
Mhm.
She did a essay back in I think 91 or 92, and it was called The Androgynous Reader. And in there she was talking about how we explore um, like gender roles through the eyes of the hero. And the quote that got me was, "The hero carries the story." And I was like, actually. And so I started kind of going back and looking at, because I started out on body strippers. I started going back and looking at these books, and it kind of clicked. And I was like, at some point, we shifted, and it stopped being so much about the hero and started focusing a little bit more on like the FMC. And she started actually getting like her own personality a little bit. And started having her own goals and her own dreams and the own ambition that she was chasing. So that was what kind of got this brew into my noggin. And then when y'all asked if I would do a lecture, I was like, that one, because it was just cooking in the back of my brain. So yeah, that was what got this a go. And I guess we can thank Laura Kinsale for that, because her essay, which you can read online actually, that one really got it
As
up.
Emily immediately Googles it.
No,
I love it.
I'm just noting this so that I can remind everybody later.
I
The
love it though.
androgynous reader.
Yeah, it's a good essay. It's a really good essay.
And
Speaking of Laura Kinsale, she always strikes me as an author who probably spent years on a book. Like her books are frequently written in a specific dialect. They involve like in-depth historical context that is far beyond the relationship between the main characters. And she was writing and putting her books out at a time when romance as a genre was like so super duper ridiculed. So I want to know what your opinion is of her female main characters, because she strikes me as somebody who was doing her thing regardless of what anybody thought about it in such a huge, important way. And I want to, but I'm like, okay, so like if I think about, I've only read two of her books. I've read For My Lady's Heart and Flowers from the Storm, and they're very different, and the main characters are very different, and the FMCs are very different. But like, I think they're pretty strong. But I haven't read 3,000 historicals. So I'm
right.
just curious, like, what do you think Laura Kinsale's point of view was about her female main characters?
So there is actually an interview. It was a blog, I think, with All About Romance several years ago, with Laura Kinsale, where she talks about how she very intentionally wrote characters that are unlikable. And that was, yeah. So, like, when you read her books, it kind of clicks and you're like, well, that makes sense. I think she talks in there about how she, like, wanted to explore, like, how she could write a happy ending for characters that aren't really, like, you can't really make yourself, like, root for them necessarily, but somehow we still do, although I don't like Flowers from the Storm, but that's a me thing. It's a me problem. It's a me problem.
I know it's so funny you say that though, because as we were thinking about unlikable FMCs, I will admit in this space that my toxic trait is I've like not met a woman I disliked in a historical romance. I don't know why. I just forgive them everything. I'm like,
Yeah.
you can be as annoying on page as you want to be. You still don't vote. So like I'll let you do
Okay, but
XYZ.
I think my
Oh my
toxic
God.
trait is worse because I think I do this. I do that for the main male character because I'm like, at the end of this book, there's a happy ending. So
Mhm.
obviously, he's gonna eventually like mesh correctly with the person he is opposite. Yeah, Evil Queen Reads just said we support women's wrongs here. I think that that's absolutely the right tack to take. Me, I'm just like over here like he'll be better at the end.
Right.
He'll be better, so it's fine.
Well, something that they were talking about in Beyond Heathen Bosoms, which Sarah Wendell, that is one. I can't think of the other author, but it's a co-write. Sarah Wendell is one of the founders of Smart Bitches Trashy
Oh,
Books, which has been blogging
Yeah.
for a long time. And
if you
something she
Google a
was,
book, you've probably been on that
Yeah.
website.
yes, absolutely. Um, Something she was talking about in there, like very briefly, was that like we tend to forgive heroes for stuff that if the FMC had that exact same trait, we would be like unlikable, don't like her.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-mm.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was another thing that kind of spun this idea around in my brain because I was like, man, that is true. That is so true. And I'm very bad about that. I'm extremely bad about that. Very self-aware.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm so curious, like your thoughts on some of the ones you started with, those like early decades, 70s, 80s, thinking of some of those early romances. And I'll admit, I think the earliest I've read is in I've read some early 90s canon. I'm trying to think if I've read something published in even the 1980s. When was Flowers from the Storm? That's 90s.
That's it.
That's
What?
the 90s.
Yeah, 90s.
Yeah.
So
That's
Mid
as
really
90s.
early as I
looking for
go.
your insight in what are women like as
Yeah.
female main characters in some of these early decades? What are we starting at?
So, since I kind of started with the bodice drippers, I think not Flowers from the Storm, Whitney I Love, it was written in 91, but it still had like that bodice dripper feel.
Yeah.
But when you go back and you look at the ones from like the 70s, starting with Kathleen Woodiwiss, I sort of touched on this in my consent post. Like the women that were writing those books and reading those books, those were women that were raised in like the 40s, 50s, and 60s. So they were still operating off of the mores that they were raised on, where good women don't. Um, and when you read those female main characters, kind of from like, I'm going to say about 72, when The Flame and the Flower was first published, they like to say that the bodice strippers stopped like mid 80s. I really think they went on into the late 80s, even kind of the early 90s. Um, but the FMCs are kind of like blank slate characters. They don't really have a lot of personality. They, I don't want to say they're like whiny, but they're sort of that like sweet and demure, and
Mm-hmm.
they don't fight back. And
Are
the
they
story
generally
kind of
younger?
happens.
Yes.
Yes. I think actually Silver Devil, I want to think Felicia, the female main character, is 15. I think I'm right. I may be wrong, but it's been a while since I've read it. I think she's 15 when the story
Cool,
starts.
cool, cool, cool.
Yeah, you you will read some of them where you get like halfway through the story and it mentions that she's like 16 or 17, and you're like, what? Whoa, wait a minute, wait a minute, and the hero will be like 37, and it's like, wait a minute now. But like that wasn't unusual. But like the story kind of happens to them. Like
Mm-hmm.
they're not really taking up a lot of space. And I think a lot of it is reflecting like traditional gender roles that those writers were raised with. Kathleen Woodiwiss very famously has said that she is not a feminist. Um, and so like all of her stories, yeah, right, like great, awesome. Um, so like, all of her stories, they're gonna end up in the domestic sphere. They're going to be wives, they're going to be mothers, the husband's career, if he has one, it's going to come first. And a lot of that reflected what those women raised at the time, what they were raised on. World War II, you had all these women that were joining the workforce because all the men were overseas. But then when the men came home, they were expected to put their husband's career first and go back home, go back into the domestic sphere, and raise the kids and take care of the house. And that's kind of the FMC that you get in those stories, because Romancelandia kind of operates 10 to 15 years behind the curve of like societal change. So I think a lot of times we look at like The Flame and the Flower, and we're like, well, that was written in 72. The counterculture was going on, Vietnam War protest was going on, sex revolution, second wave feminism. We're like, why were these books so full of rape and sexual assault? And it's like, yeah, but the people that were partaking in all of that, they weren't the ones that were writing and reading it. It was women like my grandmother, who would have been in her late 30s, and she was barely had a high school education. She did not work until her husband passed away because she had to go to work to support her kids. And she still very much believed in, the man goes to work, the wife stays at home and takes care of the family. So like all of those stories pretty much have that shy, quiet, demure FMC. The stories are very hero-centric. He's the focus. I can't even tell you half of these FMCs and the ones that I used to read, like their names, because they're so bland. They don't have like hardly any personality. They don't have any goals. They don't have any dreams. The Flame and the Flower is like 500 pages of Heather just crying and trying to jump off the ship, and
I
Brandon,
have read the synopsis of that one and feel like I got as much of The Flame and the Flower as I'm like
Yeah, the
prepared for.
Wikipedia page like took care of my curiosity about that one.
all you need. Yeah, like the first 48 hours that Brandon and Heather in the same sphere, I think he rapes her like 5 times.
Horrible.
Within like the first 2 days.
It also makes me wonder, do you think that that's, I think that there's this conversation we have even with modern historical romances in like, do we want, we know that most readers of MF romance are usually women, just based on like consumer habits for MF romance and historical romance. Knowing that, like, are we trying to project ourselves onto these blank slate characters? Is that what's happening? Or is there this sense of like not being able to envision something you haven't experienced? I guess I hadn't really thought about the fact, to your point, that like, yes, these may have been written in the 70s and 80s, but the people writing them were in their 40s and 50s. They weren't 20 something in college, part of these protest movements. And I don't know, it makes me think like, what was the purpose in that? Was that in a trying to like allow readers to like reflect themselves in, or is it just a limited ability to even perceive a different reality?
I really feel like, kind of like talking to my mom about some of this. I think a lot of the characters are just kind of a blank slate because readers that were raised on that good girls don't mentality, they could kind of self-insert themselves in there, and then when they are kind of experiencing the story with the FMC, when she is experiencing like the forced seduction and she gets enjoyment out of it, it kind of creates like this perfect victim where, like if they're getting enjoyment while they're reading it, they don't have anything, there's no like negative aspect of the FMC that they can look back on and be like, well, but she, was she really a good girl? And so I think a lot of that was just them being able to kind of have some kind of like plausible deniability when they were enjoying those stories, that they didn't, could kind of set themselves into it and not really feel bad about it, if that makes sense.
That's so interesting. It sounds like we're excusing the reader from having to feel empathy for the female main character, and that is leaving the reader with so much space to take in the full and round dynamic story of the hero, which is what the book ends up really kind of being about.
Yep.
As you're saying that you can't remember a lot of these female main characters, I'm thinking back to like a lot of the like Kleypas canon, and some of those books are like 2000s, and I'm like, she's writing a lot of heroines who have sort of like a very flimsy, like I have goals for my life, but then when you're done with the book, you're still kind of like, what was her deal? What was her name?
Yeah.
What were those goals?
And that's way far away from the 80s, right?
Yes.
So that also makes me think of this other thing that we have been discussing as we make our way. Like, we need to talk more about like the different decades, but I also just want to sort of be bearing in mind this feeling that I think a lot of readers have, which is that we can kind of like feel the difference in like the evolution of the FMC. You can kind of like get a vibe from it. It's like when I pick up a Sarah McLean, I know that there are things that I can expect, right? Like I can expect ambition. I can expect a memorable quality to that FMC. I can expect that the former mistress opera singer is not the antagonist of the story. And there's just like a level of like, there's a way we're treating women in this universe that's present for this author, and this is the type of FMC she writes. Now that's later, that's like into like 2010s, right? But like, why can we like sense this?
Yeah.
I was thinking about that today because I was like, when exactly, like I was trying to go back and be like, what book have I read that really made me go like, that's a completely different like brand of FMC. I don't actually think that it changed until much later than we think it did. I would say like late 2000s, early teens.
Yeah.
Is when, because you had the rise of like Sarah McLean, and then you can even kind of tell like the shift in when you were talking about Kleypas, you can tell the shift between like the Wallflowers and then the Ravenels.
Like Midnight Angel.
Yes, like it's completely different.
Yeah. She does a couple of different, you can tell, you're like, Lisa, what was going on in your life? Like, did you get a new therapist?
Yeah,
like you did like leaps and bounds of evolution.
Yes. But I think like I almost want to believe that part of it's just like the rise of like the internet. And
oh yeah,
like,
oh my God, because before it was like you would pick up a newspaper and read a review, but reviews were not for everybody.
No.
That's
so everybody
true.
was not talking about your books in detail.
We didn't have Smart Bitches Trashy Books.
No, we didn't.
Before this to
Smart Bitches
check
Trashy
every
Books
book.
is where it all changed.
Yeah. But I think that, because I was like, you still read, like, I was thinking about the Kleypas edits, and I was like, the Wallflowers was written in the early 2000s. Like, it's 20 years ago, but it's not like that long ago. And then I started thinking, and I was like, I really feel like the internet had kind of an influence because information spreads faster. That and like societal change happens a lot faster now. I was thinking, this is not societal change, but I was thinking today about like Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce started dating, and within a week somebody had written a Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce romance. Like, so like,
yes,
that was not happening in the 90s or even early 2000s when we were all like AOLing and MySpacing. But yeah, I think Julian said something a while ago about Beverly Jenkins, and I'm telling you, if you pick up one of Miss Bale's books from like the past 5 years and you go back and you read like Night Song, two different realms.
Yeah,
I'm reading Levex right now, and those are 90s, and it's so different from even like when I read Wild Rain, Tempest. It's just so interesting to see I feel like it's such a gift when you have those authors who write across decades because you can actually see that. It's made me, the author I keep thinking back to ever since you brought this topic up is Loretta Chase, and thinking about Jessica Trent as like a 90s heroine and I can't just, I'm so curious what your thoughts are on Jessica Trent and like the beginning of that kind of heroine in the 90s. And like, is she still operating as a foil to Dane? Is it still the Dane story? It's definitely the Dane prologue.
Mm-hmm.
And like, I don't know, because to your point, like, I feel like we hadn't quite shifted yet then.
I kind of, when you look at the 90s, like, those were going to be your authors and readers that did grow up during second wave feminism, that did grow up during the counterculture and sexual revolution. So you can feel that shift from the 80s to the 90s and even like into the early aughts. But I don't actually think we really had that much of a change until probably the early 2000s, because you got to think like third wave feminism, when like Anita Hill testified against Clarence Thomas in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee because he was sexually harassing her. That's what launched third wave feminism and bodily autonomy, and like, no is a full sentence, it's not a discussion. So you still kind of have those books in the 90s, especially like the 90s Clapus, where forced seduction didn't just magically like go away. And I really don't think it's until the early aughts. Of course, I love Jessica Trent.
I love her.
I love her.
But like, when I challenge
it still feels like it still feels like the Dane show. I mean, she's still kind of there to.
She goes in and she cleans him up. She cleans up his whole life. She tells him what to do. She tells him what to say. She tells him how to dress, you know, like she just like fixes him because she's the boy fixer.
Yes.
Like she's an unruly boy whisperer and she marries one.
Yes.
And it's like she felt like an evolution of that. Give more FMCs weapon. Yeah.
Yes.
Like Jessica Trent is the fully evolved FMC of that era. Yes. It feels like, but it feels so different from like the dressmakers.
So when we're reading that, are we feeling we're like, oh, for the time when this was written, this is exceptional. It almost makes more sense for us to work backwards from now, for us to work backwards from a time where authors are writing these stories, knowing that Bookstagram exists, knowing that Goodreads exists, and knowing that people are demanding, you know, more diversity, different types of relationship dynamics, tentacles sometimes, and they're giving us what we want because we're here, but we showed up when that wasn't the case, right? And what was happening then, and then what was happening before then? It's like you almost have to work backwards.
So and like, I think, okay, so Lord of Scoundrels is the Dane show, but then when I think dressmakers, I'm like, I don't remember the men's names.
It's all about the girls. All about the girls. It's all about the dressmakers, okay? Not the cravat wearers.
Right? My favorite book in that series, Vixen and Velvet, could not tell you that guy's name.
Okay, My favorite in that one is Sophie and Harry, and I don't remember the title of the book. I just remember
Scandal Wear Satin.
That was my favorite. I don't remember anything about it.
Yeah, like what happens in that book? I don't know. Like, there's this time when he's like mad that someone wrote her a love letter. I don't know. I don't care. Like, I loved it.
It's about Sophie. Like, that was such a shift even for Loretta, now having gone back and read her early ones.
Yeah, like, let the women wear goofy disguises. Don't just make them play off of the men.
Yes. I think the good thing about having these authors that do have such like prolific careers like Lorraine Heath, Lisa Kleypas, Loretta Chase, even Catherine Coulter, I'm telling you, if you read a Catherine Coulter from the 80s and you pick up one from the past like 5 years, it's like, Catherine, were you okay? Like, were you all right? Did you get a good therapist? Because
she wasn't, though. You had been lobotomized. No,
That's wild. I haven't read Catherine Coulter yet.
You almost like kind of have to look at those authors because so many of those that were writing back in like the 70s and 80s were like one hit wonders. Especially like the Zebra line, because they would pick up like a singular author, publish their book, pay way more money for the cover art, not hire an editor, and ship it off and be like,
there you
there you
go.
go.
They were
And now
using
here we all
that
are,
Yeah.
40
new
years
metallic.
later, and we'll kill to get our hands on that original art.
Yes.
Hitting up every thrift store across the land. Hey, folks, before we go any further, I just want to pause and say if you're here for extra credit in Romancelandia University, this week you need to be DMing me cravat. The word is cravat. You will receive 2 points of extra credit if you DM me the word cravat. That goes for folks who are here tonight for the live and for anybody who watches the replay, okay? As it gets further away from the night that we recorded this, you might want to like tell me why you're texting me that word. But God bless. Thank you so much. Puppy.
I love it. So when you think of like, I know you kind of said that you felt like early 2000s is when we made the shift. Like, what are the authors or even just books that you think like that one I can see like a very different third wave feminist prototypical FMC? When did that feel like it shifted?
I started thinking about this. I really feel like, I hate to keep bringing up Kleypas because there's a million other authors, but I do feel like Kleypas, her Ravenel series, I think Beverly Jenkins, like late 2000s, are perfect examples. There's even some back in the late 90s, which is why I feel like it's just kind of hard to pinpoint exactly when things change. But I know like Patricia Gaffney's, which this is a controversial book, but Patricia Gaffney's To Have and to Hold, you have Rachel, who is a convict that murdered her husband and spends like 60% of the book being traumatized and dealing with her whole trauma. And then Mary Bala was a good one. I hope I said her name right. Mary Bala?
Bella? Bella?
Is it Bala?
I heard about her like this week. I'm so excited to read her.
She's so good. Hers are really good ones too. And I mean, she never really had, like, even her oldest ones when she was writing for like Signet, I don't think that she ever had FMCs that were like blank slate necessarily, but they were for sure like that. They were there to prop him up. A lot of those I don't even remember their names. I remember him, and that's pretty much it. Rhymes.
I love we got some comments. Debbie said rhymes with Kellogg, so now we all know how to say Bellog, Mary Bellog. And then she said, any thoughts on Bedouins? I feel like those heroines are so amazing, and I'm not familiar with those.
I love the Bedouin saga. I was talking to Jillian from Only One Bookshelf about them today because she read one of the prequel books. But I always think of the last one, which is the oldest brother, who is like this pain in the butt, like cold, starchy, stuffy Duke. But he wants her to be his mistress. And she's like, no, thank you. I'm good on that, sir. And he's like, you've just refused me. I don't like that you've refused me. And so like all of that, the FMCs in that series are kind of like, no, I think I'm good, bud. I'm going to get what I want out of this, and then you can trot on your merry little way, and that'll be it. And I'm going to wash my hands of you. Thanks so much. They're awesome. They're great. I love them.
That reminds me of the Levesque that I just read by Beverly Jenkins, Through the Storm. Because I don't read as many 90s, I'm like, oh my God, we get a mistress proposal, a rejected mistress proposal, shoot, I do need to actually break up with my mistress while I'm married to you moment. Like, it's a different era. It was such a ride.
I even think about like Sebastian in Devil in Winter when he's like, I'm going to get me a mistress because I would never be so bourgeois as to lust after my own wife. And I'm always like, buddy, this is the 2000s. Why are we talking about you going to get a mystery? Like, but I think a lot of those older FMCs had, like, they were all debutantes. They were all these like 18-year-old debutantes. It was their like first season. They didn't have any real world experience, and that's another thing you started to see like come in the 90s was, I think, FMCs with trauma that's not trivialized. Candace Proctor had Night in Eden, which is phenomenal. But the FMC is a convict. She gets sent to New South Wales while it's a penal colony, and she's recently lost her baby, and she gets hired by the MMC as a wet nurse for his son because his wife has died.
Ooh.
And that is a heavy book, but I remember reading that book pretty early on and being like, whoa, like
that takes place in Australia?
Mm-hmm.
What's the name of that one?
Night in Eden.
Okay, I'm like, I'll add to TBR. There's like a kind of trauma that's like, it's like, it feels juicy to read about, and then when it's the trauma that they're inflicting on each other, that feels entirely different.
Yes.
So like, I don't know, like that kind of book, that sounds heavy, but I'm like, ooh, there's so much potential for healing.
Emily has a very high tolerance for non-inflicted trauma between MC.
Well, so everybody, a lot of people are reading Courtney Milan's Brother Sinister right now, and these books have, I keep saying these feel like they're a little bit of like advanced reading for historical romance readers, like not in the way that these like early bodice rippers, I think those are truly like the advanced, and this is sort of like the intermediate, because she's expecting you to understand the times a lot.
Right.
She's not gonna explain like the ballroom that much. She's just gonna drop you into it with characters that are like really, really fully fleshed out, and her heroines are extremely memorable, and they all have a lot of agency and a lot of ambition, and they're like doing stuff and going places, and it's so much fun to read. But I just keep thinking, I'm like, man, if this was like my first historical series, it would be hard to enjoy because I would be like stopping to Google too much because I just like don't understand the setting. Like when you're reading, if you're starting with something like Kleypas, which is where I started, I got like a full historical romance education. Like, this is what a ball's like. This is what a season is. This is the freaking peerage. Like, there you go. You won't remember her, but you remember what a barouche is.
Also, I just have to, Nellie Wilson called out Courtney Milan changed the game for indie publishing. Amen. And called out RWA for being horrible, which RWA back in the news for their new AI shtick in the last 2 weeks. And I saw the headline and I was like, I thought they were done after Courtney Milan. I did not think that they'd survive.
She tried to finish them, but apparently it was just a KO. Like, we gotta go back in.
Like, it's still, oh yeah, Courtney Milan is just next level. But again, a product of her experience, like to your point, Tori, that I'd not really put words to. Courtney Milan is so open in her author's notes about she was a clerk for a Supreme Court justice. She has a career, she was a lawyer and she has a master's in chemistry, which Debbie Mitchell Gale taught me. I had no idea that she had a master's in chemistry. Yeah, what Courtney Milan hasn't done, I'm not sure, but she's bringing all of that into her books because she had the ability to do those things in ways that earlier generations of women authors didn't have that access.
Sharing one's gift. Ever heard of it?
Right? She's just unreal.
I think Courtney Milan is one of those authors where she's not really afraid to kind of make she was a stand-up comedian.
I think she said she was probably a stand-up comedian at one point.
I was about to say,
what's done it all?
What can not do at this point? I believe it, honestly.
I believe it too. She's very funny.
I think Courtney Milan is one of those authors too that's not really afraid to write a FMC that's a little difficult and a little bit of a pain in the butt and be non-apologetic about it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like her characters, they're not, I think, intentionally trying to be hurtful like two other characters in the story, but I think they are a little bit difficult, but in a good way, if that makes
It's
sense.
like, well, it's like the Eris effect. I just finished that one.
Mhm.
I know Emily's reading that one now, but to your point, like she writes a female main character who everybody thinks is too much, so she's like, just watch, I can be more. Like I can be even more
Yes.
annoying.
Yeah, I
Yes.
I'll
can
be
be
even
even
more
more.
offensive. I'll take up more
Yes.
space.
Ugh.
I
And
think
then you'll be Googling the color of her dress because you need to know
you need
what
to know.
Sheen.
Fuchsine looks like.
Yes.
God.
Well, I think like you had this, like you had so long where these FMCs didn't really have a personality, and so like you didn't really like or dislike them because
Yeah,
they're
you
just
didn't
sort of
really
ambivalent.
think much about
Yeah, they were
them.
just there. And I think now with, and obviously we still have a long way to go, but like with the way that diversity in romance is now, you've got neurodivergent characters, you've got characters of
Mm-hmm.
color, you have characters
Mm-hmm.
from different backgrounds that aren't just the rich white aristocracy. Um, I think it's so ingrained like in our culture that women have to be just enough but not too much and not too little. And if
Mm-hmm.
they get out of that box, we're so quick, and I'm bad about it too. And it's just,
It's in the smog we all breathe.
yeah, we've grown up
It's
with it,
we
especially here in
can't
the
avoid
West.
this. Yeah.
Yes. And I think that like it's not that authors weren't writing FMCs like that, because Joanna Lindsay, her characters are pains in the butt. I love them. I love them. But I was recently rereading Gentle Rogue, and Sarah McLean, actually, it's one of her favorites. It's one of my favorites. And she did like a letter at the end, and she was talking about how much she loves Georgie, and kind of like the Lindsay FMC, which was back in the 80s. And she was talking about how like Joanna's, if you get in their way, they're going to run over you. So you better move to the side. It doesn't matter if you're the hero. It doesn't matter if you're the gardener. You better scoot out the way, or they're going to shove you off the pirate ship. And I think we see a lot more FMCs like that now. But I think that we have a hard time decentering ourselves and our own lived experience. And especially when it's a character that doesn't look like us, and doesn't have the same um, kind of background that we do. But sometimes I think that we slap an unlikable label on them because that means that we don't have to make ourselves uncomfortable.
Mm.
And if we go, they're unlikable, and we move on, then we don't have to analyze why they make us uncomfortable. Why does this character, having very valid trauma and reacting to it, why do we get upset about that? And I think sometimes we see like aspects of ourselves in those characters and we don't like to have that reflected back. I'm notoriously hard on stubborn characters. When she's just like holding a grudge, and I'm like, girl, let it go.
Mm-hmm.
And then in real life, I'm like, I will hold a grudge until the day I die, and then 2 days past the day when you die, sir. So like, I don't think that we like to see our own flaws reflected back.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think instead of like evaluating why we act that way, we're like, she's unlikable. I don't feel like dealing with her anymore. And I think that kind of limits our worldview of experiencing other people's, lived experience. We just slap an unlikable label on them and go about our day, and that's that. We put them in a little box and shove them away. And I don't think that that's really fair to those characters.
That is an excellent point to bring up, and something that we should all be sort of just keeping in the back of our mind next time we're reading and a character strikes us as difficult to love. It also does definitely call to mind that, like, as you're saying, like, the Lisa Kleypas like Ravenel series sort of like is part of like a more recent generation of FMCs, and it goes back to that thing where it's like you can kind of feel where they're different and they're evolved. There's an even sort of newer set. I would say that like Felicity Niven is writing like this. Alexandra Vasti is writing like this. Daria Vernon is writing like this. There's sort of like an even newer generation of authors. And then I feel like Courtney Milan has like, she sort of has like booped over, because like Brother Sinister does not feel the same as like Wedgeford Trials.
Yeah.
Where readers are asking for more diversity in their stories, and we're getting neurodivergence, and we're getting racialized characters, and we're getting love stories in unusual or unseen by our own eyes facets, and then those books are being reviewed as like, I couldn't relate, I didn't like it. And it's like, okay, so if I can't look at a female main character who like is white and I'm white, and I can't relate to her because she just is reflecting something back to me that's uncomfortable for me to look at, then like I'm certainly not going to enjoy reading about the experiences of people who are having an entirely different lived experience from my own. But there is like a real call for those stories. So there is even like a newer generation of FMCs that I have so little in common with, but who I love dearly. Like from the Wedgeford Trials or any of those authors that I just mentioned. They're writing like really good stuff. And then in the comments, folks are mentioning Cat Sebastian. Cat Sebastian writes mostly romance, which is like it's such a frustrating thing that like we're not getting a lot of like men writing historical romance. I'd love to see more of that. But also earlier before we went live, we had discussed FF romance. When do we start seeing FF romance in historical romance, and how you can't fall back on that, like we'll just let the hero carry the story when we have two women as the main characters. I'm curious about this.
So I can't think of off the top of my head historical romance, like when that would have started, like specifically. It probably wasn't until I'd say probably the 2010s. Cat Sebastian, I know, did a novella. I know in the past 3 or 4 years we've had several that have been published. Still not, I don't think, enough, but I know back in 76, I think there was a FF. I believe both characters identified as lesbian, and it was actually interracial, and it was called Love and Her. It was by Anne Shockley, and it was published by a major publishing house. So like in between point A and point B, I don't think that there was very many, if any, but you actually kind of popped more romances at the time that were successful, which I think kind of plays into our tendency to like, fetishize romances. But yeah, I don't think it was probably until I'd say the last 10-ish years, less probably, that you really started to see these FF romances that were especially published by Trad Pub, especially. You had some indie, but not Trad Pub.
It makes me think that there's like that effect of like, because Bookstagram is here asking for it, because the internet is here and Goodreads is here asking for it, we have to like work backwards. It's like, it's very recent. It's interesting.
And indie publishing, I think, Nellie brought up just what Courtney Milan did in blowing open indie publishing and like making that not only a feasible option, but like a respected, that this is a way to bring stories from marginalized authors and characters into mainstream reader circles. And that's where I think that, because Tori, I keep thinking of when we did that roundup of books that Goodreads did not show up in the Goodreads Choice Awards, right, for romance, which was super white. And I think that there's some self-reflection we as historical romance readers have to have, because there were like 20 slides worth of contemporary romance by racialized authors featuring racialized characters. But when it comes to historical romance, and again, I think that like consumer habits drive what can be published, sold, etc. And we have to work harder to make sure that the Courtney Milan's, and that even like we have some newer author, like some people were shouting out even in the comments. We have Jane Walsh writing FF historical romance, Olivia Waite writing FF historical romance. Alexis Hall does some not all historical. We had obviously Kat Sebastian was shouted out, but like you have to really make intentional decisions about diversifying your reads, especially in historical romance, because it's like a 9-to-1 on representation in historical romance.
Well, I think too, you get like, I think of I was trying to think the other day. I was talking to somebody about how one of my goals this year was to read more trans romance by trans authors. And I was trying to think of a single historical romance prior to Lady for a Duke by Alexis Hall that had a trans or non-binary main character. And the only one I can think of off the top of my head was
Ratcatcher's
Kat
Daughter.
Sebastian.
Oh.
No, but that's a good one too. The only one I could think of was Kat Sebastian.
The Marquess.
Unmasked by the Marquess.
Yes,
with a non-binary character.
Because I'm going to say FMC because that's how Kat Sebastian does identify the character. But the FMC, like her, it's not just like the girl in pants trope. Her character is tied into her, the way that she dresses. She dresses very androgynous, and that's part of who she is. It's not just her, character pretending to be a man, dressing as a man, and at the end she's like, okay, well, I'll put on my dress now and grow my hair out long and have babies. And I remember reading that one and being like, I've never read anything like this in my life. And I was so like, I really had to sit with that book for several days and be like, this is completely different than anything I've ever read. Why do we not have more of this? And I really think part of it is that I think part of it is that we have this standard in historical romance where if anything does not fit this very finite straight line that has been set for the past 50, 60 years, even further back looking at Miss Georgette Heyer, I think it's hard for these authors to get those books published because when they do, they get such a negative reaction because readers like to hop up and say, well, that's not historically accurate. And I always just want to kind of shake them and be like, people haven't been miserable all through history. Like you should be reading books about queer joy and soft queer characters, which I think Kat Sebastian does so well, and KJ Charles does so well. Where their entire character arc is not them, being miserable and getting tomatoes lobbed at them and being chased out of town for being queer. And I think that's a problem that we have got in historical Romancelandia that we don't know.
We talked about it a little bit with Meg, but your Georgette Heyer post had me thinking all week about like this fictionalized, whitewashed, straight Regency world that is largely the invention of like one or two white women of the 20th century who were like, and we have this like we let a Georgette Heyer define what the Regency looked like. And again, I also love Nellie Wilson called out like these are
historian. This
is a giant colonial project, right? So there's also just the difficulty of like we're in the British Empire and when we're reading Regency. So with that noted, but like it wasn't that white, it wasn't that straight. It's just that she like once she established this kind of like hegemonic, like this is what the Regency looks like, to your point, Tori, and you said this so well in that post of like any author who's trying to write the Regency or write some of these periods and actually reflect characters, like again, this is not Regency, but I go back to Courtney Milan reading the Wedgford trials and her saying like, this is not historically inaccurate. Like Asian people lived in the diaspora in Great Britain. Like they were there, they were living and, building community. And so it's not at all anachronistic for me to invent this town.
Right.
But yeah, to your point, readers, like we have to take responsibility for the kinds of authors that we support and the stories we support and the things that we demand from publishing, because without indie publishing, we wouldn't have a lot of those stories because traditional publishers have certainly not prioritized it. And we've allowed these like whitewashed eras to become the norm to a degree that shuts out other voices entirely.
Well, you even have, like, with Georgette Hire, like, a lot of our archetypes for your FMCs now are entirely based on characters that she created, like, especially like the ingenue. That's like her claim to fame. And so many of those characters carried down for so long. And I always thought it was interesting that the writers, I think, that really changed that dynamic and said, okay, but what if we have a character that doesn't want to get married and she wants to pursue women's rights and she doesn't want to, you know, start popping out babies 3 seconds after getting married. A lot of those were BIPOC writers.
Yeah.
I mean, Beverly Jenkins,
Yeah.
Courtney Milan. I mean, I don't think that we give those authors enough credit for what they do, like just generally as a whole.
Yeah.
But I really don't think that we give them enough credit for how they really have changed how we write and think about women in historical romance.
Yeah.
I feel like we could just talk about this.
We could
Like,
really just talk about this all night. This is like, Tori, this has like been such a freaking fantastic chat. Like, I wish we could go another hour.
I know. Because it's like you have such insight into the long careers of some of these authors, but just that shift. And I think it's so helpful for those of us like Emily and I. Like, the reason we started this project was because we are learning and trying to like forge our own like path through backlists. And it's hard.
I would like, since Nelly said this about Tessa Dare, I would like to make a point about Tessa Dare.
Please do.
I was reading something the other day. I don't know how many of y'all have read of her books. I love Tessa Dare. I adore her. I was reading an article that was talking about her and Nalini Singh, who wrote the Side Changeling series. And in there she was talking about how Tessa Dare was talking about how a lot of people find her female main characters unlikable. And I was like, how? Like, I don't understand how. But I was going back and looking through her books, and I was like, well, I don't think they're unlikable. They just don't want to settle down with a man immediately. And I was like, okay. That's why. That's exactly why.
Yeah. Minerva has important fossil discoveries that need to be published and does not need to be waylaid by marriage.
No. Yeah, I love Tessa Dare. Her historicals, fun little random side note, there is a bodice ripping scene in every book that she writes as a ode to the bodice ripper. Yeah.
Man, that's the kind of thing that we're all really here to hear.
Yeah. Yeah, if you go through any of her books,
excellent.
There's a bodice, and it's usually funny. Like, I think it's A Week to Be Wicked, or maybe another one. I think it's A Week to Be Wicked, where her bodice gets caught like on the carriage door handle or something.
I got a carriage door.
And she was looking at him. She's like, "Well, my bodice is ripped," and I was like, "Right on the nose."
Good.
There.
That's
right
cute.
On the nose.
I love that.
Love her. Love Tessa Dare.
Well, we will make sure to we're going to collect more of Tori's thoughts and make sure that we get some of these book recs. We've had so many great comments with additional authors and recs in some of these categories, and we will round this up into a post that people can save and refer back to later.
Yes.
But thank you so much for being willing to chat with us and go live and just talk about all the books that your 3,000 odd books that you've read. I love it.
Wow. So amazing. This was wonderful. Thanks to everybody who joined us. Thank you, Tori.
Thank you. So excited. This was fun. I loved this. I'm so glad we did this.
Yay. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.